Father, I know in the real world that this issue of free will is something that people misunderstand almost every time and dramatically. Help us to reason through it so that we know to whom we're speaking when we speak, and that they're likely to misunderstand this, and that we might always have an idea to deal with this subject so that we can tell them what a man can do and what he's likely to do and what you must do. Help us to balance all these things out without becoming hyper-Calvinist of any sort. That would be appalling both to me and certainly to you. Help me to say it in a way that has the vitality to it that it should have, seeing that men's souls are in the stead here. So appreciate it if you'd help all of us to bear down on this tonight. In Christ's name I ask this, amen. Hey, if we can look at class number 4, my wife assured me that the quote on the paper is the right one, but whenever there's really close, some people are really concerned if it isn't exact, and this one might not be exact, though she assures me that the Calvin quote is, and I'm convinced the other one is too. But I say that because sometimes I'll memorize them, and then later I can't remember whether I looked it up or wrote it down. So, and they're close enough that I wouldn't want anybody, when I see Augustine, I don't want him mad at me over some misquoting, for heaven's sake. And isn't it wonderful to think that you actually will see those guys? I mean, that's real life. He'll be pretty sanctified by the time I get to him. Yeah, that's right. Thank you, John. That's a good reminder. I'll forget the second one, then I'll just misuse it. But it's true, and sometimes a corruption of this quote is one of those sentences that sinks in and you can say it very quickly to people, especially pastors who they think you're saying the same things they are sometimes in different kinds of churches. And if you say, well, here's the thing I've been concerned about, it's the idea that you've ruined yourself by the use of your free will. See, if you say it like that, or that's something I've been thinking about, or something that troubles me, or that I contemplate, they'll always get the point. Don't like it always, but they get it. So that's how I sort of said this instead of some of the Luther quotes, if you remember, which are much more lengthy and maybe helpful in a class, but not in a car. If you're sitting with a guy in a car outside of a Wendy's, you have to communicate a little bit differently than you do if you're getting to have him sit out here for a while. So, our moral, spiritual condition before God intervened, just so we can remember it, because I want you to get the idea, and of course we know, it looks like the blue's a little lame, so we might not use it. And I was thinking about it again today, and I think I may have said this, but I don't think I did to you. I know that I did say to you that this is an important thing to me, because this is where the rub is. This is how you decide, how am I going to deal with the man? You need to know the size of the problem before you can do anything else. Total depravity is always going to be very heavy on my list, and here's why. It's really the problem. You see, the problem is if this is all you knew was the T, you'd know one thing. We got a problem. Now, how are we going to solve it? Well, really, these three are the solution, aren't they? The black's not doing well in my hands either. But the problem, these three, if you knew it was as bad as I'm telling you it is, well, what about, isn't it going to have to be unconditional election? We couldn't find anything in this guy that was any good, remember? How many things did he do good? No, not one. See, did he seek after God? No, none of them do. Okay, well, it'd be pretty hard to speak on his behalf. You'd hate to have to defend him. So, I guess if he's going to get elected, it better be unconditional, because there's nothing in him that is lovely. That's what we're going to find out when we deal with the you, is there's nothing in him. Not a single thing. So if somebody wants to be elected on the basis of anything in them, Well, you'll have to be a pretty good attorney to convince me there's a single thing that would merit anything. No, it's unconditional, which when we come to it, I'll talk about unconditional love, because unconditional love is not only misused and misunderstood, but it ends up causing a problem with unconditional election sometimes in speaking to people. Can you see, if he's going to have to elect you and there's nothing in you, it might as well just be he's going to die for you. Why would he die for excess things when he knows it couldn't be somebody reaching out to him? If nobody's going to seek him, why in the world would he be dying for sins? And you'll see when we come to it that John Owen makes the simplest sort of an application. The idea being this: if you owe a debt, if Margaret owes a debt to the pastor and owes $3,000, and I go over and pay the debt, and then he comes and evicts her, how can he evict her? I paid the debt. And yet that's what simply they're asking you to do when they're telling you that he dies for everybody's sins. They're saying all the debts are paid and God's still going to evict you. Well, that can't be true. You can see it if you couldn't see it through any other thing, and we'll go through some other things, but that one's pretty simple. And here's the other thing that seems like if it has to be unconditional, it better be irresistible, because you know what? You'd resist it. That's your history. Okay? That's what you're really like. So the perseverance, well, what would you expect? God's going to do these and leave you alone? If he did, you wouldn't do well. You don't do well at anything. You notice there isn't anything in here you do very well at. So when you're talking to people, you want to remember they don't do any better than you. And you're not far removed from them. It always seems like we are. And I told Charles last night, a guy actually said something so filthy to me last night that I'd never heard it before. And I really thought I'd covered about everything. But this guy shocked me. And then I thought about today and I realized, well, I might not have been clever enough to say anything quite as filthy as he did. But I would have I had the, he might just be glib. But the other thing is we're not far from them. And you just have to remember that. We tend to become Christians and start looking at everybody else like they're lesser than us. Folks, they aren't. There is nothing about you that's different except that God changed your hearts and stopped your crime spree. Okay? That's all. So you can see it here. Heart corrupt, as Philip says, mind depraved, desires, wills, enslaved, determined to disobey God, kill him if possible. You are the very people who would have put him out of his misery if you could. He didn't leave you that option. If you couldn't kill him, you'll put him out of your thinking. You did that. So do other people. You shouldn't be surprised at it. It's natural. Standing with God. Well, can you see it? By nature, children of wrath. If you never did know anything, and just let me remind you of these scriptures, because some of them are so, I've looked at them so many times that if you don't memorize these few, you're making a mistake. You really have to memorize some of these, or at least be able to turn to it awfully quickly, because the gist of it, and you he made alive, who were dead in trespasses and sins, in which you once walked, according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air. When people say to me, I don't believe I'm being ruled by anybody, Luther's going to say here that it's not surprising from Ephesians 6 that people get the idea that demons are the rulers of this air. Well, here, look at this passage, Andy. The prince of the power of the air, you're walking according to him. The spirit who now works in the sons of disobedience. You see, they might find fault with the Bible, but they shouldn't find fault with your interpretation of the Bible. In this passage, you're a slave. Remember, Bob Dylan once sang a song like, you got to serve somebody, right? And everybody does. And now, you did too, and so did I, and we didn't have any clue we were being enslaved, that we were enslaved. See, it says here, among whom we all once conducted ourselves in what? In the lust of our flesh, fulfilling the desires of the flesh and of the mind, and were by nature children of wrath just as the others. Now, if you can find something in there that a guy would want to boast about, you're pretty, that's why I'm saying to you, sometimes if you just take the Bible, if you get a chance with somebody and just say, now this looks pretty bad to me, you read it and tell me what you think, because I'd like to find something good in there. And maybe I've just read it. Well, they'll see it. You see, they get it. They just don't want to get it. right? And they want to put it out of their thinking, but don't mistake it. The Bible is plain on this account. That one's an important one. You are dead. He made you alive. Okay? That's it, simple if you're born again. Now, the next one, enemies. Romans 5 is going to be, while we were yet enemies. So everybody in this room, we have that in common. We now are brothers and sisters, but we had in common that we were at war with the deity. Now, you might not have felt like it, but you were, and so is your sister, and so is your mom, and so is the guy at the 7-Eleven. And really, I can remember the night that I decided, I saw myself going up the hill to fight him one more time, and I just decided to throw down my weapons. I didn't know what they were, but I knew it didn't make any sense. That cloud of dust looked like it was coming over the top of that hill awful fast. And I realized that army coming over that hill looks like it's going to be formidable, and I don't want any more of this. I just want to surrender. I want to throw my weapons down and go up that hill and say, what would you have me do? Kind of what Paul did in an instant, isn't it? Lord, what would you have me do? I don't know. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I just didn't know where to go from there. But don't be surprised when you're looking at people. The other thing that I realized, think about how active you were as a dead person. You were dead, but you surely were active, hyperactive, every one of us. But we don't like to think of ourselves that way and dwell on those things in the past. And the problem is, if you don't give that a fair memory, you won't give the guy at 7-Eleven a second look. You have to understand him. You have to know how he thinks if you're going to communicate with him. You see? I mean, it shouldn't be, good salespeople often tell you, identify with the person. If they stand tall, stand tall. If they kind of back away, if they give you too much space, they'll tell you to mimic that person sometimes. But the last thing we want to do is to remember and take a close look at the guy at the 7-Eleven, because what? Well, we reminded of our past. That's the only way you're going to have sympathy for the guy. The only way you can pity him when he's saying the most filthy things to you. And you know, sometimes it means you have to reprove him. Sometimes you have to hug him. But always you should pity him, because he's a pitiful creature, I'll promise you that. And without those tears in your heart, they'll never get to your eyes, and they won't get to your voice. And why would God allow you to deal with something that precious if you're going to be so cold? That's simple. To me, it's that simple. Because I've made all those mistakes is why I'm saying it. Now, does God's wrath abide on them? Every second of every day, they are at war with him, and his wrath's not coming. It's abiding on them. It's nipping at their heels right now and would have them absolutely any second and devour them, justice would, if he didn't keep it back. All the while, they're denying he exists. If people want to know how patient he is, I don't know how you could explain it any better. That wrath is determined to get them, and he just says, stay, for now. Yeah, the question is, can we start over? Well, next week we're going to, aren't we? We're going to come to, that's how we do it. God decided to start over, make you a new creature. That's the only solution. There is no pounding out the dents. You wouldn't stop to have the dents pounded out, right? If you ever reformed, if you were married and you got caught doing something and your wife called the lawyer and you decided to reform, you were like the sow who just couldn't wait to get back to the filth. The Bible uses that expression of the dog who returned to his vomit, if you remember. I mean, that's everybody out there, but also you. So the last thing you want to do is to get a bunch of people in here, a bunch of sows, scrub them down real good. It'll be about 2 minutes before they fail you. They want to be in the mud. What we need to do is we're going to have to get them in here, educate them, beg God to change their hearts. That's the only thing that'll make them want to stay clean. It was your case. Okay? Now, free will or enslaved. Yeah, there you go. Sometimes you get in those conversations with a pastor especially, and a guy be saying, let me see if I got what you believe. Is it free? Yeah. You said it was enslaved. Yeah. Yeah, you got it. I thought we were going to have trouble with this. But see, the reason I say it is because it comes up like that, and the guy will start being perplexed. So you're going to have to explain it to him then in some way. And this is kind of how I try to do it. Free will, of course. How free? There's the problem, see? He won't usually ask you that. You have to ask that question. He might ask you if you have one, is it dependent? He'll go through all of that. But dependent really is something I'm saying for a different reason. You have to introduce this idea when you're dealing with somebody, especially a pastor, how free? There's going to be limitations. Limitations has to get into the conversation or you're not going to make any headway. How about an imaginary conversation I could have with me? The reason I said this is because I told the pastor the other day, when I was first converted, I was so ignorant after this, and I was I'd been only around a charismatic church and a couple of Nazarenes who had a second work of perfection, and it was I was pretty stupid. And so when I heard that this book, Bondage of the Will, was there, I ran out and bought it and read it, and it talked about, I told Eileen, things contingent and things necessary. I kept reading it because I didn't have any friends who knew anything, and I just couldn't get it. I realized, boy, I'm really not that able. So I read it 6 times before I figured out it wasn't about things contingent and things necessary. It was about free will, really. And these other things were how he was saying the world fell out, and free will wouldn't be any exception. So, if you ask a guy like this, and I've had this almost exact conversation with a man, did you read Bondage of the Will? I read it 3 times. I still don't get it. You'll need to read it 3 more times unless you prove to be a better student and less stubborn than I know you to be. What did you think about this quote from old Martin? You know, when you tell Christian people that in their pursuit of eternal salvation they should not concern themselves to know what is in their power and what is not, as long as they do not know the limits of their ability, they will not know what they should do. As long as you and I don't know the limits of these people's ability, we won't know what to say. You can't possibly say the right thing to a man if you don't know what he's like. You see, you'll overestimate him or underestimate him. All Luther was saying is, what does God have to do and what does the man have to do? It's a very reasonable question. But you can see he's really hard on Erasmus. If you read the whole book, you might not even like old Martin. They were a little rougher in those days and very impolite. And when he tells the guy what a great writer he is and that he didn't want to answer because the guy was such a tremendous writer, he finally says, the only thing I can't figure out, though, is it's like having apples of dung on trays of silver. You know, I never met anybody who writes such rotten stuff, he tells him. But, you know, he's pretty rough with him, and he beats him up the whole book if you read it. But it used to be me. It's just a matter of choosing to follow the Lord, right? That's what every pastor will say to you. See, and you have to know where this conversation's going. Yeah, but Luther's asking something a little different. He's asking about the limits of their ability. You see how I'm going to have to keep... Anytime you can get back to the limits idea, I don't care if it's far-fetched, you need to retreat to the limits idea. They have to get the idea that it's free but limited, or you just can't make any headway. At least I can't. Ability to do what? To choose to follow the Lord. Anyone can choose to follow the Lord. Who told you that? See, now the reason I say things like that, you might say it your own way. I do it because I want them to be startled. I want them to stop. See, I want to deal with that in a minute, so I'll just say something that they aren't expecting in a conversation. But you have to do yourself. I'm just only telling you how I try to do it. What do you mean? Everybody knows that. So then you can see in those days I was still waiting for the game to start. But Luther is going to make these points. Everybody has a free will. Now, the reason I put that first, does that sound simple? I'll tell you why. Once you start talking about it, the very first thing that guy will tell his assistant pastor is that you don't think anybody has a free will. I promise you. That when he doesn't know what else to do, he'll distort what you said, and he'll say, that guy doesn't even believe anybody has a free will. That's not what I said. I said he has a free will. There's just something wrong with that free will. See, so that point has to be, in my mind, always made. A man's free will has limits. See, I'm going to go right back to that. It cannot and will not choose to follow God. Now, I chose here to put John 6, for those of you who are wondering, and John 3 later because it just of time things. But it basically, when you get to John 3, and he says no one can enter the kingdom, no one can see the kingdom unless he's born again. you know that being born again has to precede the other. And you're going to have that conversation with nearly every pastor or missionary that you ever deal with, because they still don't get that. And then we get, if you think about it, the next part here, let me just go to that. The John 6, when you get to that, no one can come unless the Father draws him, unless the Father grants. See, those things, when you start talking about ability, and we will later, you can see where the can and may argument is going to come in, and you do have to talk about what can be done and what may be done. But for right now, if you're going to just keep to this idea that you want to limit free will, you have to get that through to him, because if the man concedes that free will might not be totally free, you really have your foot in the door, and he'll need you to tell him, and he'll be anxious to hear more of it if he concedes to that, promise you. So the question is, how free is a free will that's only free to choose against his soul's best interest? If you say that to somebody in a different form, if you say to him, let me ask you a question. If I could convince you that you have a free will, right? We're okay with that? Yes. But there's something so wrong with it that it's only free enough to choose against your best interest. Wouldn't you want to choose your own best interest? Well, nobody will say, no, I think you should always do what's worst for you, and you should. No. That's why I try to say sometimes you have to learn, you have to think enough and sweat over it to try to ask questions. Otherwise, you'll always fall back into not having a conversation with people. You'll just put it, you're just going to have your points. You have to know the points and trust that the Holy Spirit will help you. If you ask the same thing in a question, you'll know how to respond. That's why trust me, even if you failed right off, it'll be because when you get home you'll realize you could have followed that question with another question. I'm just telling you, people don't want to be taught. They want to think it through with you. Especially pastors. I'm just telling you, you can figure out why on your own. I don't know. But I'm just telling you, people are afraid to admit they're wrong. And I'm convinced pastors need friends because of that. Pastors, it's okay if they're wrong. It's okay. What did you expect? But people get this idea that the guy has to be perfect. To lead him into battle, he just has to be swinging the axe. I don't care whether he runs fast or is bow-legged or, pigeon-toed. I just want him to run. Once you get that freedom for a pastor, he'll be a lot better pastor. He doesn't have to be perfect in his knowledge. That's why we're all getting educated about these things. He's still the leader. But it's very hard for guys who are kind of isolated. Consider this. Now, the great Augustine had kind of this Latin way of doing this, and I remember the first time it came clear to me pretty quickly, but I didn't like the Latin. So if you think about it like this, before the fall, what he's going to ask you is, before the fall, could Adam choose to do good? Of course. Could he also choose to do evil? Okay, so that's what's going to happen, is that God gave him the freedom, right, to choose evil. He had no reason to. Remember, you had a reason to. You were born the little snake that Jonathan Edwards said, and I said somebody, you were born that little viper, you just weren't big enough to bite him yet. Okay, that's what Edwards said, and I believe he's right, and you should never mistake that. When you see that little baby, that baby will be lying within 24 months and stealing within 36 months, right? Because if you say to that baby, don't do this, what's it do? It bangs off that wall and heads for that one room in the whole house it's not supposed to go into. That's just, listen, they come by it naturally. They got it from you. So you were the same way. Now, I do think they're cute, but I'm not quite as deceived about that as I once was. When I see them, but I don't say that because women get touchy about it. And I've learned not to say, well, let me tell you, it's like I'd rather have a boa constrictor, or I used to say those things, and it really never did work after all. But after the fall, now, if you're Adam after the fall, the moment after the fall, could he choose to do badly? Yeah. Could he choose to do right? No, he was done. And if you think about what imputation, when you see that kind of discussed in a class, if you think about the ramifications of imputation, it is staggering. We're here tonight talking about the condition of the guy at the 7-Eleven because of imputation. It's just amazing the problem that was caused with that particular sin. One sin must be a dreadful thing. So we go to the next one. Before you were born again, choose to sin? You bet you were good. You weren't great at it because you hadn't been practiced enough, right? Maybe you just had to get some years in before you could perfect your craft. But choose not to sin? The thoughts and intents of these hearts in this room were continually evil. Either that or we don't believe the Bible. It's pretty easy to see if you really look at your life that it was always about you. Never really, seldom about other people, and certainly not about God and His glory. It just wasn't going to be. You were hampered. After you're born again, can you choose to sin? Well, you did it today sometime probably. I did. I mean, you do those things, so of course you still have that as an option, but here's the freedom. Choose not to sin? Yeah. Greater and greater strength to do that, right? Why? Well, you work out your salvation with fear and trembling. Why? God's at work in you. Now, if He weren't at work in you, this wouldn't go very well. You're just never going to find anything in real Christianity that you can boast about. The gifts you have aren't yours, right? The talents you have aren't yours. The money you have, He gave to you. The air you breathe, He continues to give to you. The pastor said He really is upholding the world, isn't He? Including you. Creation finished, but always renewed. It is His story. And without Him, there isn't anything of you that matters. Okay? When we get to this, friend, your free will always chose to sin before you were born again. That's the limited ability. That's the phrase that somehow you have to get through to people. Don't you love to sin? If you ask a guy, a normal guy, he'll just finally, first he'll say, no, I try to do the right thing, you know. And I always say to him, well, you just lied again. Now, I'm going to write that down, but I'm going to keep score. You're going to lie. Quit lying to me. Don't you like to sin? I mean, it's pleasurable. At least I've always thought it was. It's still attractive to you in this room because it's pleasurable. If every sin that you sinned was painful on the spot, we'd be a sanctified bunch, wouldn't we? The problem is, sometimes the pain shows up 25 years later and his name's Larry and he walks into the room and says, are you my dad? See, there's always that old expression, if you expect to sin, you should expect to suffer. But if you remember in Ecclesiastes, it says because the penalty for it is slowly passed, slowly executed, you see, we're stupid enough to think there is no penalty. If God really did do that, if every time it was that dog at the edge of the yard getting the collar, right, well, you'd be kind of circumspect about running to the borders of your land. But because, really, even born-again people, they'll do things and you marvel at it, you look at yourself and then you're thinking, I must have forgotten that God was watching. I must have thought His eye wasn't on me, even though I profess all of the time it is. Well, how else would you account for it? For your behavior? I see it was dark. Remember that, the psalm, when deepest darkness cover thee, darkness hideth not from thee. To thee both day and night are bright, the darkness shineth like the light. Come on, you can't hide from them. And you know it. The other guy doesn't know it. Right? The guy who was dealing with last night, he's ignorant of the fact God's keeping score and watching him, and that wrath is right above his head, and that there isn't anything to stop him except that the God who he's cursing isn't willing tonight, for him to die from it, to get what he deserves. After you're born again, the ability to choose not to sin appeared. Now, number 5, we need therefore to have in mind a clean-cut distinction between God's power and ours if we would lead a godly life. Self-knowledge and the knowledge of and glory of God are bound up with it. Now, if you remember, one time I gave you that Calvin quote where Calvin was saying it doesn't really matter whether you begin a study of this with man or God, you're going to have to know both. And really that's what he's saying here. God's glory will be diminished, not ultimately, but in our eyes when we think man is the trigger to all of these things. Man is not the one to be praised for your salvation. Without him changing that heart, you would never have heard, you would never have believed, and you would never have followed. To God be the glory. And anything short of that, it's Jonah 2:9, salvation is of the Lord. If somebody gives you that 2 seconds, just say that. Jonah 2:9, salvation is of the Lord. That's what I believe. Because it is. Now they'll say, well, I believe that too, and then they'll proceed to tell you how they sat up in bed and sipped the soup, or, you know, they have all kinds of illustrations, and every time, no matter how they argue with you, it's always in their hands to save themselves. Now they'll argue with you after you say, you know, that doesn't make any sense. God couldn't get you saved unless you sat up in bed. You deserve credit for it, John. And they'll say, no, I don't want any credit for it. And they're never more prideful than they are at that moment in my eyes. Because anybody who has a logical mind would know, well, that's true. I mean, they could be, all the devils in history could be pounding on that door right now, right? But unless Ida lets them in, well, then Ida must have a part in it. You see, and that's the same thing in reverse when you'll hear people say it, and they'll say, Bill, the guy is practically dead. He's going to have a one shining moment, isn't he, Andy? He's going to stand up and say, I see Christ and I want him. Doesn't matter that Jesus said it's not the way it works. You know, remember what Jesus said there to Nicodemus, and you're a teacher in Israel? You're a teacher in Israel. You don't know how these things work? See, he didn't think that was so complicated that it'd have to be all of grace. Old Dr. Gershner used to say to me, Mr. Moore, if you could just, when you're talking to those pastors, if you just tell them to step down until they get this part right. I tried that. It didn't really work. I was pretty, I thought, yeah, okay. But then I never had a guy say, thank you, I'll just retire tomorrow. Whenever you think I'm ready to get back in the pulpit, let me know. But it didn't keep me from trying that. And I learned it doesn't work that way. I had to be a little friendlier. When was it freed? I'm asking you, need your free will to be freed. See how strange that sounds? It's kind of like Francis Schaeffer with True Truth or something. You need your free will freed. That'll catch their attention. I'm just telling you, if you think about it, that's really what it is. When you were born again. Now here we go. We're going to talk about when we were born again. Now let's try number 6 there. Let's try Luther again. Hence it follows that free will without God's grace is not free at all, but is the permanent prisoner and bondslave of evil, since it cannot turn itself to good. Now, see why I'd like your free will to be freed. If you can get that idea across to somebody that they have a free will that's enslaved, if it's a free will that needs freed, sometimes just the way you say something to me catches a guy's attention, Ron, you know what I mean? Where it'll make him stop a saying. What, say that again? You have a free will, but all you got to do now is set it free. Well, you can have a conversation over that log, you know what I mean? That one takes them a minute, but it's true, isn't it? On top of everything else. But we have a natural aversion to this because eventually you're just going to say, oh, Lord God Almighty, there was nothing in me, not a single thing. If free will is ascribed to men, it is ascribed with no more propriety than divinity itself would be. They would do well to take the word out of the men's mouths and speech. Here he goes. For the mass of men are sadly deceived and misled by the phrase. People think it means a power of freely turning, and here's the key part of this. A power of freely turning in any direction, yielding to some, subject to none. See, that's the point. They really do believe it can do whatever they want, absolute freedom to turn any direction. And maybe sometimes, you know, depending on who the person is, if you had a trucker, maybe you'd have to say to him, what if I told you that your freedom is fine, I don't see any problem with it, but you can only go left? He might say to you, well, that doesn't make any sense. That's right. That's exactly how your soul operates. You can only go left. You can't go right, but you're free to go wherever left will take you. See, sometimes you just have, these are simple ideas that need to be in the guy's own sphere. If he's a school teacher, it might be something different. If, you know, you have to kind of think through these things when you're talking to people, because in my mind, the examples that fit their trade stay with them longer. That's all. It's just some reason that happens, and it works. So you have to think a little bit about it, to me. This last one, this false idea of free will is a real threat to salvation. Now, I told Randy, because he had read ahead on the Spurgeon sermon that's in there on election, and he was excited about it. And I said to him, you know, this idea of wiping it out of the language is not one that I would go for. I like the idea of free will. I find it easier to deal with total depravity and free will because they make you explain the phrases, and you're going to have to explain it anyway. I prefer to have something like that he would think is confusing. I know what he meant. But I'd rather deal with it because I know they're going to get confused about free will, so I better find a way to explain it. And you need to do the same because once they come to that point of surrendering to that, I'm telling you, that door is open. There are a lot of other ideas will rush in behind it. So Luther goes on here to say, however, with regard to God and all that bears on salvation and damnation, he has no free will, but is a captive, a prisoner, and a bondslave. Here we are at that same idea again. He's always going to serve somebody. And right now, he's a bondslave. So were you. But did you ever feel it? No, you were riding high. Pretty good Joe, you. See how, I mean, once you know it, and you're looking at the guy tonight, you need to really take a hard look at him and you say, what's he think of himself? Well, you know what he thinks. You thought of it yourself. He's completely wrong. He's absolutely getting drug around by the most cruel master. You can almost see the ring in his nose. That's why I said to you, for me, I try to see him in chains. And remember that song this morning? The chains fell off. That my dungeon flamed. What a verb that is there. Flamed with light. See, why? Wesley saw he was in chains. It's hard to go back and think of the things you did and say, I was so much a slave. It does make you want to see people in terms of getting their freedom, because that's what they need. We call it a lot of other things, and sometimes I think I know we should be able to say, I just want him to be in heaven and there's a judgment to come, and all that's true, but you notice we don't get motivated by that the same. We can't think very well. Sometimes when you start realizing that your sister is actually enslaved right now and being dragged around by the most fiendish master ever, it might look like it's her dragging herself around. But remember, in 2 Timothy, he says, they've been ensnared. You see? Don't you want to get them out of the snare? You ever see one of those little snares in a bunny rabbit? Don't you want to let them out? Well, what about your sister? I see, she's really a full-grown woman talking to you woman to woman. No, she's a mixed-up soul who's enslaved and carrying the heaviest chains around. And you go home and go to sleep. You say, well, she just doesn't listen. What did you expect? It's unnatural. You see, you still have to cry out to God to do it, and you have to recognize that this is going to be something that you can participate in, but not something you can do, because you're in over your head. She loves her chains. Okay? Now, when you get back here, you see, I put those in. You remember our discussion of Genesis 6:5. You just have to memorize these, is why when I was thinking about it. Ephesians 2 and Romans 3. No one does good, no, not one. No one understands, no one seeks after God. You don't have to remember any more of that. But if you get that, you can put them at odds with the Scripture, which is what you want to do. So they do things, but the one thing they don't do is from a pure heart seek after God. Don't let them kid you about that. Luther describes the darkness, and this is where I love that one phrase in about line 3, that all should be completely blind is no wonder at all. Think about how he viewed this. Now we're talking about the early 1500s. Matt, how does he, can you imagine how startled he was when he got this idea through his head? It's no wonder at all men are blind, he says. Shouldn't be a wonder to you. What is the mass of mankind without the Spirit but the devil's kingdom? As I said, a disordered chaos of darkness. That phrase I try to use whenever I'm thinking about times like last night. I just think there couldn't be any more of an expression of disordered chaos of darkness than I saw last night. And yet I'm still surprised at it. I don't know why. I mean, sometimes the depth of it should startle you, I guess, but you should always understand it's there. You're walking in it. This world is ruled by darkness, and you're the ones who don't belong here. Your home is somewhere else. It's already there, and it's waiting for you, and your citizenship is there. You're just passing through. If God uses you to free another slave, they're going to go home with you too, forever and ever. Seems like you could stand a few disagreements with that sister, right, to get through to her, because sometimes it's messy. So what? You can be polite and attend their funerals, and you can ignore the fact that they're in a different kind of chains now, those chains of darkness forever and ever, with, as Spurgeon said, with forevermore written on every one. We better be raiding this kingdom of darkness. So when you get to that bottom line, which prevents them hearing and grasping the plainest words of God, they're passing through on their way to hell, and you give them plain words, and they say, this is confusing. I don't get it. They get it. They just don't want to get it. Neither did you. If you find anything in yourself that wanted to get it, we need to go back and talk about what your childhood was like, because you didn't want to get it either. Now, you might not have been so outwardly wicked, but you just might have had a little more cowardice in you. Or, as we're going to talk about now, you might have been smart enough to avoid some civil penalties. Just because I was stupid and couldn't avoid the civil penalties, you might have seemed better, but I just might have been a slight bit more reckless. So we get on there, the guy says it's depressing. Sometimes guys will say that to you. Now here, I just put in here what Loyola had said, who's the founder of the Jesuits, because remember, he was battling with the reformers and saying, well, these guys are making it all too plain to the people. Now I tell the people and they say, I don't get it. You see? So it's a different age, but they get it. Say, when were you spiritually dead? Did you know it? When you were spiritually dead, were you spiritually inactive? Remember, you're very active. That sister of yours. In your darkness, did you know you were a slave? No. Sin seems like servitude. Why didn't you see it? See, when you get to this passage, and I had it here in John 8, let me just flip there one second. John 8, starting about verse 31. You got to remember that this was you. And every time I see it, I have to go through that. In verse 30 it says, he spoke these words, many believed him. I said to the pastor today, you don't have to read too far before you figure out they didn't believe him. It said they believed him, Arnett. Many believed him, in him. Well, they didn't. You just got to read a little bit further, and you'll figure out what that looked like. It was pretty superficial. So he goes through here in verse 31, Jesus said to those Jews who believed him, if you abide in my word, you are my disciples indeed, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. They answered him, we are Abraham's descendants and have never been in bondage to anyone. See? How can you say you will be made free? Jesus answered, most surely I say to you, whoever commits sin is a slave of sin, and a slave does not abide in the house forever, but a son abides forever. Therefore, if the Son makes you free, you shall be free indeed. Now, you'll go on here, and if you look, he gets down to verse 41. You do the deeds of your father. Uh-oh. Trouble brewing. The kind-hearted Jesus is about to let them have it. So he says to him, if God were your father, you would love me. Verse 43, why do you not understand my speech? Because you are not able to listen to my word. See, they could hear it with their ears, but not with their heart. You are of your father, the devil, and the desires of your father you want to do. Well, they got this part. They're pretty mad here. You know, they get mad pretty quickly. And it only escalates when you get over here, verse 53, are you greater than our father Abraham, who is dead? And the prophets are dead? Who do you make yourself out to be? When people say, well, Jesus, and they say it all the time, don't they, man? Jesus never claimed to be deity. They'll say those things to you. You're like, well, help me with this one. Jesus answered, if I honor myself, my honor is nothing. Look down here when you get to the middle of 55. I should be a liar like you. Pretty strong personal conversation going here, Jeff. And then, I mean, you think about it. Your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day. He saw it and was glad. They said, you're not even 50 years old. He says, well, before Abraham was, I am. Now, people say, well, I don't know if I know what that means. It doesn't matter if you do. They did. Didn't they? Well, look at the next verse. The ones who believed in him said, what? Oh, I see, they took up stones. Yeah, I'd say they got it all right. The believing seemed to be a little bit shallow. Now, there is hope, and I'll tell you why there's hope. Look around the room. Okay? It's not a hopeless case, or Tracy wouldn't be here. Isn't that right? I don't care. That's one thing that we don't marvel at when we see each other, is that when you say, oh yes, we're all monuments of grace, I don't know if you believe it. It doesn't matter. The people in this room are precious because they're precious to Him. They're special because you were special to Him. When He puts you in there with other people, you better value them because He does. What if He were here tonight in person as He is in spirit and said, I'm going to show you what Bill Moore thinks of John? You might be shocked at the low estimate a man is capable of having of another man who's what? The angels would be very certain that John was somebody special. My goodness, they were at Calvary. They were above Calvary watching this and saying the Creator had to die. John must be somebody special. John's going to rule over me in eternity, they'd say. And I'm glad. Those things are true. When you look around this room, this isn't just a group of people. These are saints. You are somebody in the next world. You're really somebody in this world, except the only eyes that see it tend to be eyes that you can't see. Those invisible eyes don't make any mistakes. Do men follow their hearts? I put that because I was going to say, well, good, then all we need is new hearts. I thought it was going to be difficult. See? Well, it would be difficult if Charles and I had to figure out how to get you a new heart. See, it's not quite so difficult if you're dealing with the one who sprinkled the stars across the sky. When He wants to create a new heart, it looks like He does it easily. The good news is that's His job. It's not yours. So let's let Him do it. Let's tell a guy what he can do, and let's tell God what He can do. Let Him tell us. And we'll get this done right. Why did I once snicker and scoff at Christianity and then change my mind? And you did the same. Why one day, Mike, and not the next? People told you were a sinner. You're like, check, got that. Yep, might have been sitting in the front row of the church, or might have been sitting in the front row of the bar. It hardly matters. Right? Without being regenerated, does it really matter much? The guy in the front row of the church has a big advantage because he hears, and he'll have a greater condemnation if he never does hear, really hear. Okay? So you want to understand these things because you are going to have to wrestle with people over that issue of why did I believe on Friday when I didn't on Thursday? Or 2008 instead of 2007. That's a powerful argument when you ask it as a question. I'm going to tell you my life story, and up to this date, here's what I did. And the same words came, and I got it. Why? How would you explain that? Is it maturity? See, when you want to start down that road, because you're going to end up honoring God, aren't you? Pretty soon you're going to have to say, here's the way I see it. God intervened. And it looks to me like there wasn't a single reason for Him to do it. Now that is a glorifying testimony. It happens to be true. Now, I had done this because did God do for me what I couldn't do for myself? I had just written those little lyrics in there because did you change my poor heart for me? Yes. The answer to that is, did He do what you couldn't do for yourself? The answer is absolutely yes. That's the answer. He did it. You couldn't do it for yourself. I don't care if you lived to be 900 years old. It was never going to be within your power. He changed your poor, sad heart and gave you a new one. If this is so easy to understand, why do folks get so angry? They do. I can tell you that. And again, I don't think the temperature in the room is a bad thing. if you don't raise it. If you just learn to accept that people sometimes are emotional, it isn't a big deal. If you don't get personally offended quite so easily, it will be no big deal. Okay? That's how it works. A famous man once said, God made man in his image. Anybody know the end of this quote? And man returned the favor. Yeah, man returned the favor. That's how that ends. Voltaire said that. But I think about it sometimes because when you're talking conversationally, it's one of those things again that strikes people for some reason. Some things penetrate their hearing, and some in further conversation. And remember, you really are trying to have a conversation. You're not trying to give them your laws or your plan. You're trying to have a conversation with people, and this will do it. And you can blame it on Voltaire. I said, what do you make of this? The guy says this: God made man in his image, and man returned the favor. You ever trying to rule your own life? I guess he means rule it. And what, you think that's true? See, you just wait for a guy to answer. Really, you're doing the work of the Holy Spirit. And one of the things that we're going to talk about more than once, because it's not always, in fact, it seldom is talked about in churches, and I don't know how you can talk about witnessing without it, is one of the things, if you're faithful in witnessing, I said it to Matt today, I think, you want to illumine people. And you'll hear me say it again. You want to illumine people. You aim at illuminating people, okay? That's what you're trying to do, bring light to the darkness. Now, sometimes, if you're faithful, that happens. You illumine them. Sometimes, you blind them. If you're faithful, you get rewarded either way. True? Yeah. See, this is all you can do. You can be faithful. Does God require you to be faithful? Yeah, He requires you to be faithful. Is He watching for your faithfulness? Yeah. Who determines if they see or if they're blinded? Okay, then that's not your domain. Then let me ask you, when you're witnessing to people, and you're going to hear me say it in a minute again, how in the world would you come up with a system where it's all results-oriented? How did that happen? The results aren't in your power. What are you going to do? If you live your whole life and no one's ever converted through your words, are you going to say you failed? No, what you're going to say, because you're reformed, is God must have failed. Now think how foolish that sounds. But isn't that really it? You put it over to His side of the table, you pray for him, you speak to him as clearly and as faithfully as possible, you give him the whole counsel of God, and it's up to Him. And then you don't tinker with it. Doesn't mean you don't cry, doesn't mean you don't reason till the very last breath they have. That's all within your power to do. But this isn't. So, Matt, are you wanting me to stop? Matt's wanting me to stop. We'll take a 2-minute break, change the tape, and we'll finish this up. Okay, let me pick it up there because I want to come to something else. If you go over to the next page, God changing wills without permission, they'll always accuse you of this. I wouldn't serve a God who would change somebody's will without permission. Well, I guess they don't know the God of the Bible. We get defensive. I listen, and you're tempted to say, "Oh, God's not." No, He is like that. Yeah, it's a good thing. Didn't I explain free will to you, you idiot? You want to tell them that, but you don't do it. God stooping to trespassing. Somebody said that one time. A very famous guy, Norman Geisler. There's a book called "The Potter's Freedom" by James R. White, which is an answer to a book by Norman Geisler, who's at Dallas Theological Seminary, I think, or maybe not now, Matt. Maybe you know if he still is. But he actually said in some paper that it was divine rape. Now listen, when a guy says that, I'm going to tell you something. If he were here, I'd put him, and I mean this, I'd choke him right now if he were in this room, because it's sick to say that. A guy, especially a guy who's really that authoritative in the way he says things, and people respect him. He's a good guy, I think. I've read a lot of other things. But when it comes to how a man's saved, he's a dangerous person, because he'll argue this very nonsensically if you read his book. So if he ever gets his tape, I would love to have him call me, because we're both kind of old. I'd probably still be mad at him. But I don't like guys to say crazy things like that, because it's blasphemous, really, to me. People do get riled up. Regenerated folks, well, yeah, that's us. You ever get prideful about your conversion? There wasn't a single reason to. God didn't keep us from doing it. You know what I mean? I've gotten real prideful about it, and you can't imagine that can happen to you. But we do. Unregenerated folks, and I mean this truthfully, they'll fight you and God for the right to go to hell with their free wills intact. Tooth and nail, they want their free wills, and if their eternal salvation has to be thrown aside, well, so be it. Yeah, okay, I guess I understand. You are really thick and really wicked. It is still his story. He's telling it. We're going to try to fit in where we come. Now, Sarah is a girl I actually know, a doctor's wife. And Sarah called me, and Sarah, when she gets this tape, Sarah was going through a terrible period in her life. And I won't tell you all the things that were terrible, but they were terrible inside and out. And Sarah's a lovely girl from Virginia who has a home in Illinois and one in South Carolina. Lovely person, full of energy, but kind of crazy when it comes to this. Now, Sarah had some reasons she should have been avoiding this conversation altogether. So she called and said, "Can you come to lunch when you come to town?" I said, "Sure." So I gave her this. "Other physicians can only cure those that are sick, but Christ cures them that are dead." She's like, "Okay, well, you know." So I say, "Well, it looks like you think you're spiritually dead, unable to do good." Whoa. She got mad at me over that, the no good, doing good. And her record wasn't sterling at that moment. Okay? But it's still that people don't want you confronting them with not doing good. Okay? Because they're kind of proud of themselves, even while they're doing something very wicked. I can tell you that. You did the same. So I said to her, "I haven't stolen your free will. I'm just looking at its limitations." See, I'm always trying to get them back to that conversation. Say, ever visited a prison? So I told her the story about when I was in high school. Like I said to you, it wasn't real sterling, that period in my life, that decade. But everybody has a bad decade or two. But I used to go 2 hours a day, and I helped in the office and in the gymnasium because I was not able to sit in a regular class without being violent in those days. So they tried to get me through school that way, and I guess there's no limit to the kind of credits they can give you. They never asked if I could read. But every day at noon, I had to go to jail. And I would go to jail, and then I'd come back to school the next day. Well, when I was in jail, I didn't mind it too much, except I couldn't get to the coffee. And that's, I mean that literally. You could walk back and forth, but you'd get there, and the coffee was about really a foot further than I could reach out that thing. Now, I had a lot of freedom. I could walk back and forth in that cell, but I just simply couldn't reach the coffee. And that's kind of what happens with men, isn't it? If you find your example of freedom like that, your dog has it inside that dog run, doesn't it? It has freedom. It just can't go where it wants. It has limitations. We see limitations everywhere. Yet when it comes to free will, people want no limitations. And even if they've never talked about it, they get mad about it. It's just the strangest thing ever. So, you know, I'm saying to her, look, you're German, right? I get her into this thing about Martin Luther. All right, then I said to her, okay, no more foreigners. She got mad at Martin right off. He usually doesn't make anybody happy with that telling them about free will again. So you come down to number 7. Who took your ability to do some things, I said. She thought about it and said, "You're going to tell me Adam." I said, You're good. You're good at this. It's Adam. When? Well, when he sinned, I guess, in the Garden of Eden. Okay. How? And my answer is going to be when he exercised his free will. We're back at the beginning. By misuse of his free will, he ruined both it and himself. He exercised his free will, and look where it got him. Look where it got you. Because, as you see here, I think I'm asking right there, he's your relative, right? Are you two kind of close? Because I'm trying to say they're real close. She and Adam. You and Adam are real close. Think about all the problems that imputation caused. Yes, I'm saying you have a free will. Yes, I am saying it may choose whatever it pleases. And yes, I am saying it can only choose badly, poorly, wrongly, sinfully. Yes, now you have it. You need a new heart. The born again thing. Yeah. Goodbye, Sarah. I'll get the check. Sarah was out the door. Was I faithful? Yes, I was. Remember, sometimes you plant. Sometimes you get to reap. You get to do all those things, you know. But don't despair because I didn't run her through the exercise that you wanted me to drive her to the decision. See, once that's not on the way we do this, you change the way you talk. Now, I was surprised she didn't let me go a little further with that conversation, but she wasn't in the mood that day. And it is true on the next page, a strange thing needed to happen on Sarah's way to hell. It needed to happen. It did on yours. And I told you from the beginning, your story is mine. A strange thing happened on my way to hell. I don't think I told Pastor today, but again, last night when the guy said, what do you do? I'll say, I'm trying to write books, but I wrote this little book, A Strange Thing Happened on My Way to Hell. There's something about that phrase that stops people. They aren't offended by it, and it doesn't sound religious. And they always ask, well, isn't that your story? You were careening out of control on your way to hell, and God intervened. Every man has that story. So Sarah and the Seekers would be a cool band name, but they only have one song, and they do play it over and over. I'm a seeker after truth. Bill just needs to chill. I can't see any reason he'd mess with my free will. They always give you that, and the pastors are the same. You just have to recognize it and not be dismayed. Remember the old burglars looking for cops? Doesn't happen. C.S. Lewis was right. It's like sending the mouse looking for the cat. They're not looking after God. They're not doing these things. You have to understand how the world works. And here's how they're really going to have it. We got sinful slaves. We're all convinced we were sinful slaves. How many of you felt like rushing to the master to tell him what you did, what you're doing today, and what you intended to do to violate his rules tomorrow? Doesn't work that way, does it? We don't like that. Now, when you read about the next thing, if you read that, if you have time to read that Spurgeon sermon, you're going to find that he's very, very good about his own conversion and also how to approach even-handedly preaching the gospel. Okay? Now, I'm going to comment on just a couple of things with this right off because I want you to get something clear. Would you help me with something? Would you pass these out? And I think I might need one. Pass these out. Let me explain to you why I've said to you over and over again that I despise decisionalism. Now, the reason I despise decisionalism, well, the reasons are many. But at the bottom of it all, it's heartless. And I hate heartless when something is involving a person's eternal destiny. The reason I say it's heartless is really easy. When I give you a formula, you'll get cold. You'll deliver it heartlessly. You'll think you're witnessing, and all you're really doing is spewing out some formulaic thing that is going to be dead and lifeless on your tongue. I promise you, you can't repeat things. I couldn't tell Margaret I love her, right? I couldn't say those kind of things over and over in the same way. What if your husband comes and says, if I said, every night I call Margaret, Margaret, I think you're the loveliest lady. I'm so glad to meet you, and I love you. Now, if I do that every night the same way, what is she going to say? When I see his number come up, I'm not answering the phone. The guy, there's something wrong with that guy. You would never get away with it at home, yet on the most crucial thing in that person's life, you're going to spin it. Let me tell you the formula I have for you, sir. See, I'm saying you can cover the Romans road in a normal conversation, but couldn't you think about that person while you're doing it? Couldn't you have a heart that just wants to see the eternal God move right before your eyes? Couldn't you want that guy to be free? Couldn't you want any of those things? The emotional component of these things, I'm convinced, is the difference many times in the way God utilizes you. Why would he care to utilize you if you're so cold and heartless? It's ugly. He can do better. It's kind of like prayer. The old guys used to say, If you can pray and it doesn't move you, why do you think it would move him? You ever do that where you just pray kind of that, oh Lord, we're just so glad. You don't mean it. Well, why would you'd be better off not to do that? Does he not know the thoughts and intents of your heart while you're praying like that? You'd be better off to keep quiet, thoughtful until you had something to say, and when you were thinking about it, that prayer itself would be magnificent, and he'd be pleased. We make these mistakes, but when it comes to people, it's particularly troublesome. So, decisionalism is heartless, and it's also just what I said before, it's results-oriented. And once you get this, and I didn't get it, I thought that's all it was. I'm telling you, whenever you tell a man that all that counts are his results, and I said to Randy, when you hire a guy at New York Life, and you tell him, I'm going to show you how to be a New York Life guy. We want you to exemplify courage and love for the family, and we tell him all of that, and then we take him aside and say, look, all it really counts is if you can sell 13 policies a month, Jack, you'll be president of the company. What's he going to do? I see, he's going to forget that New York Life, I'm a good New York Life guy speech. He's going to start saying, when I say to him, oh, I want that policy, is there anything when that switches over at age 60, like what do you think that's going to be like per year for me then? I'll get back to you, but we need to sign this thing tonight, Bill, because, see, why? He's not going to get your praise unless he has the result. But if you tell him the whole thing is about being faithful and the results will take care of themselves, he'll tell the guy the truth. Because he can report to you that that did away with the sale. And you'll say, that's good. We don't want anybody to misunderstand. It means something to be a New York Life guy. So you have to decide whether we're results-oriented. Now, normally in Reformed churches, we're only secret, closet, results-oriented folks. You know what I mean? We still want the same thing, but we don't say it out loud. Now, if you go to the typical Baptist church or something, well, they'll just tell you right up front, Bill, all that counts. Now, it is true that it says if you're a winner of souls, you're a wise man. But a winner of souls the right way. There's a winner of souls the wrong way. I've been that guy. And because I could back him into a corner, I really thought, I used to actually say, and I heard a guy say it not long ago, give me 30 minutes, I can convert anybody. I actually said that. And a guy said the same thing to me. I said to him, oh boy, that makes me ill, you know what I mean? I just, thinking about it, till I explained to him I'd done the same thing. But remember, this is what we're going to be saying the whole time. Don't get into this idea. Get into this one. Be faithful. You do what you can to all of your ability, and you mean it, and leave the rest up to God. That's where we'll get results. God often gives results, but I said, if Noah was a preacher of righteousness, how did he do? Didn't look like he did so well if you were talking about results. Now, let me see. Claire, do you have any of those left? I think I'm the one who doesn't have one. Now, figures. This is the one, the facts. Let me just go through this, and you can take these home. Before we get to the unconditional election, we kind of change tunes there, because when we get to that, no matter how much I beat you with the total depravity, trust me, you'll still have too high regard for yourself. We always do, and those men. The thoughts and intents of your heart. And I want you to do this. If you could visualize this, Marie. There's somebody in your life. If somebody in everybody's life, a son, a sister, when you read these, I want you to think about that person's face. You know what I mean? Where you picture you and them standing side by side, because what made the difference between Marie? Do you have a sister, Marie? Okay, so when she picks one of those sisters or all of them, what is the difference between Marie, in God's eyes, what was the difference between Marie and the other sisters? They were all in the same boat, folks. Whatever was in God that made him choose Marie, I don't know what that is. He was all wise. One day, there may be some mystery that will be explained to us, but I can tell you this. The way the Bible spells it out, there's no hope for her or her sisters. Somehow, she got the hope, and we need to say, oh Lord, could you do the same thing for my poor sister? But picture her face when you see these, and don't forget how much you have in common with her. The only thing that changed you from her to you, to the new you, is God. Ephesians 2, you he made alive who were dead. 3, when and if you ever did right, it was for the wrong reason. You must have had a payoff of pride someplace. Okay? Maybe you were afraid of jail. You did the right thing, or catching AIDS. Or maybe you were going to get bad publicity in that little town you grew up in. Or maybe you were going to get some kind of VD. You abstained for the wrong reason. The right reason is for God's glory. You did it for your own hide's sake. Nothing to brag about. Did you give money to the poor or to the church? It must have been to be seen of men. Okay? Remember? They give their alms to be seen of men. They have their reward. I've done it. You probably have too. When you really were charitable, you were showing how continually evil your thoughts were. This is a Dr. Gerstner idea. Let me find 1 Corinthians 13 for you so that you can understand what he's talking about here. I heard him do this. I told the pastor I ran across some old things, and of course, doesn't mean Dr. Gerstner certainly wasn't right about everything, but he was very important in my thinking, so I will have an inordinate love for him compared to other people. Verse 3, and though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned, but have not love, it profits me nothing. It's very possible for unconverted people to go to the stake. They can give their bodies to be burned and give all their goods away. So when they're the most charitable, it doesn't mean that they're doing it for the right reason. They have to have love. Love for what? And if you have love for God, you'll have love for your fellow man. When you really were charitable, you were, oh, that's it. How evil you were to deny you were evil. I'll leave that one to you later, but you'll see, even when they're doing wickedly, they deny they're doing wickedly. You'll see it in John 9. You were consistently evil, I'll give you that. If you remember Romans 3, if you weren't anything else, you were consistent. You never did good. You never sought. You never did try to understand, really. Okay? So if anybody accuses you of being a slacker, you weren't when it came to doing evil. You were very consistent. Even when praising God, you were evil. These people honor me with their lips, but what's the next phrase there? Their hearts are far from me. That was you, and that's the sister. Even when praising God, you can do it evilly. You maintained your innocence even when you were caught red-handed. Lord, when did we see you hungry? Like that's going to excuse it. Most folks in fact grow weary and then become inconsistent. Not you. Isaiah 57. You say, how can that sister of mine just keep dating those same dogged men? And you do all these things. Well, you did too. The wicked are like the foaming sea. They never ever have rest. You didn't either. They just say they have rest. I just want peace of mind, they say. You know, honey, there isn't a chance. If that was really important to you, you'd have to give this up, the way you're living. While praising God, you were able to maintain your idolatry. You coveted your covetousness. You don't think that this happens, and you see it here. Remember, I've been around church a long time, and then when I started worrying about the way that I thought about money, because I always said I didn't care, and it seemed like whenever they tried to take it from me, I wanted to fight over it, which didn't make sense to me. So, for this you know that no fornicator, unclean person, nor covetous man who is an idolater. Covetous men are idolaters. Okay? Is that you? Well, that's all. We all still fight that, in my view. It's not easy. You'll find it, if you don't think that one is very clear about it, it's in Colossians 3:5. Therefore put to death your members which are on earth. Fornication, uncleanness, passion, evil desire, covetousness, which is idolatry. So if you're covetous for anything, you're an idolater. You're really supposed to be a pilgrim passing through. Seems like we travel lightly. Instead of trying to carry as much as we can. Like I say to you, because he wasn't a Christian, Thoreau said, I used to feel sorry for the boys in my neighborhood. He said they'd inherit farms and stuff, and it'd be, trying to drag a 40-acre farm with a barn on it on his back through life. He said the guy'd be better off just to sell it. Travel light. Guy can do that, and he wasn't even a Christian. You were good at it. What? At hypocrisy. It went largely unnoticed. In passing judgment on him, you condemn yourself. You condemned practices in other people that you were doing yourself. You expected to be rewarded for good deeds even when they were evil. They were done for your glory. That makes them evil. Matthew 7:22, many shall say to me, Lord, did we not do what? Mighty works in your name? Mighty works in your name. And he said what? I never knew you. Depart from me, you. I see, there were workers of iniquity, and the whole time they were doing good things. But for the wrong reason. See, but I got tricked by it, but he didn't. Apparently he didn't. Why? He saw the thoughts and intents of their heart. You were a one-man or woman crime spree. You broke every one of God's laws. That was you. If you got one, I promise you, if they forgot to tell you one of the commandments, you might have skipped it. But all they had to do was bark it out to John, and he'd have broken it as fast as he could get up. That's our nature. You can have anything in the house, son. Don't eat those pinwheels out of that refrigerator, my mother used to say. The minute she was snoring, I was in there. You know what I mean? Yeah. Yeah, man, I couldn't wait. I didn't even like them. I just couldn't stand it. It was just so, it was like poking me, you know. When you did keep the law, you did it inadvertently. Or for his law. And Dr. Gershner used to always say, the one thing you can bet, if a man keeps the law of God, he won't do it because God commands it, but he'd also say it turns out mostly to be men's law. For instance, if a man doesn't cheat on his wife, he'll say, well, I would never do that. These unconverted men will say that, but they don't do it for God's glory, right? They do it because men's law would get them in trouble. A guy will lose his job at New York Life if they get that scandal going. Now today it probably wouldn't get him fired, but in his day it surely would have. But you have to understand, men can do outwardly good things, and God sees it as evil at the very moment you're thanking him for building your church with that money. Okay? Only if God could be tricked it'd be different. Now, when you kept God's law, you can bet it was man's law. That's the one I'm getting to there. Remember, they were doing all those things for him. 17, you were the worst when you were the best. While appearing to be good, you were evil. We're back to that same thing. You gave away all of your goods. You gave your body to be burned. It appeared, if we attended your funeral, they just said, there's nobody like that guy. And God said, I never knew him. He went right from the stake into the eternal fire. That probably isn't a good thing to happen in that order. So, 18, you were good at giving good gifts, you deceitful devil, you. They didn't know you were an evil person bringing a good gift. Folks assumed you were good because you did good. Where's that? Matthew 7:11. You being evil know how to give good gifts. We're not. People do it for a variety of reasons, Matt, don't they? They ingratiate themselves. They do all sorts of things. Oh, none of you ever done that, though. Always from the bottom of your heart, you do all those things. Ron, isn't that right? It wouldn't be for any other reason. Your apparent fruit deceived me. I told the pastor, by their fruits you shall know them. That's true. By their apparent fruits, you'll be deceived. Because you and I get deceived by apparent fruits. Christ didn't. That's at Matthew 7:22. He didn't get tricked, did he? I did all these things for you, Lord, Lord. I never knew you. You don't even have any right to call me Lord. You see? He sees your thoughts. Okay? You knew there was a hell to avoid, but you were unfazed. But Tracy will say, and I'll say to her, can you believe it? You talk to them about this stuff. It's so real, and they just ignore it. Well, so did you. Why? You put God in all those thoughts out of your mind. People are superstitious. Don't mention death, Bill. God might remember that I'm going to die. They actually say those kind of things, you know, and it tickles me a little, but it's very sad. You realize how sad that is, like the omnipotent God is going to remember all of a sudden. You tried to block out, you love slavery in 21. Let me go down to this because we have to close. You tried to block out the light. Good thing God is all-powerful. John 3:19, light is come into the world, but you love darkness. You loved your darkness. When you see them and you say, I've reasoned with them, I don't get why they don't get it. They love the darkness. You did too. Think of that sister or brother, whoever it is, and pity them. Pray for them. Try again. That's what you need to do. God better not ask you if you want to be saved. You decline. What? He did ask, and you did decline, come to think of it. Okay? Guess God will have to sovereignly intervene. Knowing the facts, does gratitude seem reasonable? Remember, I told you from the beginning, I may not accomplish it, but my goal is to make you more grateful for your own salvation than when we began, and I also want you to have a soft heart for those folks who are just like you, but who are in such imminent danger, so that you'll talk to them differently, feel about them differently, and weep over them incessantly. This is all that counts in this world. It isn't going to matter if Bill Moore drives an old car or a new one. It took me 58 years to figure that out. It's pitiful. Knowing the facts, what should we do? We should evangelize. They're in danger. Let's ask the deaf to listen, the blind to see, and the dead to rise. Okay. Now we're on track. We know the case is bad, and we know our duty is, let's go do it. And we're asking them to do just what they can't do, Bill. That's right. Why do we do it? God told us to. See? You don't like that. You can't figure it out. You can't understand it perfectly. I don't think He asked you. He's the eternal mind. You are the guy who loved the darkness. Okay? We did it. Now I'm going to show you how, and then we end with this. Naturally, we'll ask the natural man to do what's unnatural. We're going to ask him to believe, trust, repent, seek, and follow. So, that'll be the end of the total depravity. I'll assume you got it now, and if you keep this, we'll get to the good news. God intervening.
I'd love to hear 30 seconds about her brother. Yeah. I just think it's so encouraging.
Yeah.
Someone she shared Christ with.
Well, come on up here a second. We have a microphone right here, and you can, I'm sure it'll pick up on mine as well. That's all right. He's your pastor.
I got a text from him. He's lived a gay lifestyle for 35 years, and I got a text from him 2 weeks ago, something like that, that he committed his life. These are just his words, so I'm just trusting the Lord. He committed his life to the Lord, and he was getting baptized, and he wanted to thank me for introducing him to Christ in the backyard of our house 3 years ago. And I have just spoken with him, and years went by where he wouldn't hear anything. I mean, years would go by. And I used my Facebook to put things out there, and Resurgence showed that John Piper was coming, so I just went out there. My brother lives in Seattle, and I said, oh, John Piper's going to be there in Seattle. Wouldn't that be wonderful to go to something like that? And he says, I think I'm going to take the day off. Would you like to come with me? So at the end of February, my brother and I are going to John Piper.
That's wonderful.
See John Piper.
That's beautiful.
So anyway, the Lord's here.
You're faithful, and now you can see it's not in her power, but what she did, was it essential? She threw the stone, she shot the arrow, God drove it into the heart. If you just understand, it's not right if she doesn't shoot the arrow. You can do that. And if you come back, and we talk about the next time, after you figure it out, we'll go through some of the particulars about what that looks like when you're slinging stones and shooting arrows. At least my understanding of it. Okay? Let me close. Father, I thank you for Marie and for that. Nothing is really clearer than everything that we talk about is dependent on you. If there's going to be any good change in any man that's ever lived, you were responsible for it, and you will be from now and forevermore. And because we see it clearly now, help us to understand what our duty is, what's within our ability to do and what's without our ability to do, and help us to do it faithfully. And please drive home to us that the results are yours, and that any sort of heartless, mechanical thing is neither evangelizing nor witnessing. May we drive that out of our camp, and if we don't know what to do to replace it, help me and anybody else in here who knows or has an idea to get together and to try these things so that we can see what we've got in this room that is so much of a treasure to me, such a knowledge of things, and good-hearted people that you've regenerated. There surely ought to be a fire break out. I ask all of this in Christ's name. Amen.